Attention darts fans, after searching high and low, to and fro, from coast to coast on wine and toast, the award for best hashtag in the game goes to Dynamite Darts Content, and your winner is the weekly Dartscast, baby. 3 words, Dynamite Darts Content. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to the weekly Dartscast. Alex Moss here, joined as always by my co-host, darts statistician Burton, DeWitt, on his holidays, but what commitment from him, still turning up for this week's episode. How's the trip so far and how are you doing?
So far, the trip's so good, and I'll, of course, apologize in advance for any street noise or anything anyone hears, obviously. Not in my normal recording environment where you would get the broken washer and dryer as opposed to cars pounding past. But having a good holiday so far. Went back to the country that I was at the last time Peter Wright won one of the major Sky events. How are you, Alex?
Good to hear. Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. I started my new job on Monday, so I'm getting to grips with that, but getting to grips with finally being a full-time employee. But so far, so good. And how good was Peter Wright in Blackpool this past week? The world number 2, becoming only the 5th player to complete the PDC World Championship and World Matchplay double, lifting the Phil Taylor Trophy on Sunday night. We'll start with one of our questions of the week that we've put out on Twitter this week, and it is Peter Wright now in the top 10 of all time? What do you reckon?
So last time we discussed this was about 8 months ago, I think right after he won the European Championship. My answer then was top 10 standard. But not yet top 10 all time, although I did put him in the top 10 PDC. I'm not changing that answer yet, but it is getting closer to changing. And what I said then was he needed, to keep on moving along. The fact that he was top 10 standard showed that he had the ability to become one of the 10 greatest of all time in terms of achievement. But if you look at what some of those people ahead of him have done, he's not yet there. He continues to close the gap, but he's not. Take, the other 2 great Scotsmen to have played the game. Gary Anderson, 2 world titles, 2 Premier League titles, and we can keep going from there. Jockey Wilson, 2 world titles in an era where, of course, there were fewer other major events, but he did win some British match plays and some other of the old major events, made World Masters finals, and made 13 consecutive World Championships quarterfinals or better the first 13 years. His first 13 years there, because he didn't play the first one. That's incredible consistency at the top of the game. I don't think Peter Wright has reached that level yet, or that accomplishment yet, but he is getting closer. And I put together a list. I figured 10 people who I thought were ahead of him. That puts Peter Wright now in 11th. And I don't think he's that far behind Jockey Wilson. I don't think he's that far behind James Wade, who I have ahead of him. I don't think he's that far behind Lisa Ashton now on, what he's accomplished. He's still outside the top 10, but he's getting closer. As far as standard goes, I already said he was top 10 standard of all time. But what we saw from him this past week in Blackpool was a level that we hadn't seen from him before. And that's saying something, because he was already, as I said, in my opinion, top 10 standard. He averaged over 105 in 3 of the 5 matches, including 2 that were best out of 32 and best out of 34 in the semifinal and final. The other 2 matches, he still averaged 99 3/4 and just over a ton. That's pretty darn good. He proved me wrong. And not in that I didn't think he could win the title. I did think he could win the title. I'm not surprised that he did. But he proved me wrong in that I said in last week's show that almost without exception, and basically the only exceptions are if your names are Michael Van Gerwen or Phil Taylor, to win one of these tournaments, you need a little luck. Okay, Peter Wright had some luck, but he didn't need it. The luck he had was in the early sessions against Van Gerwen and Vandenberg, they missed some darts at double, and that let him get up to an 8-2 lead as opposed to a 6-4 lead. His luck was that he wasn't under as much pressure as he could have been while still being in front. That's how dominant he was. We saw gears from him we hadn't seen before. He didn't need any luck to win this title. Almost no one has ever won this title without needing any luck. That's how dominant he was. And that's why there's every chance now that we ask this question again later this year or early next year. I might say he is top 10 of all time.
Yeah, you're right. We did ask a similar question back in November last year, just after Peter Wright won the European Championship, and the performances that he had during that weekend rather. It wasn't across the whole week. It wasn't over those longer formats that we have in the World Matchplay, but he did average 100 plus across all 5 of the games. And our poll was a little bit different. We put the options top 10 of all time, top 10 PDC only, outside the top 10 on both. And sticking with the top 10 of all time, 46% of our listeners saying that he was in the top 10 of all time back then. We've put the poll out this week, and the options are, is he in the top 10 of all time, yes or no? Maybe there's a little bit of recency bias considering what we did see last week, but 82% of our listeners at the moment saying that he is in the top 10 of all time. And I guess I'm a little bit biased because I am a Peter Wright fan, but if I'm taking my Peter Wright wig off, I think he is very, very close to that top 10. I think he is on the cusp, and it's got to be said as well. You go back even 2 years ago, and the CV that he had in the game, it would have got him nowhere near the top 10. He had a UK Open, he had the World Cup, he had 3 World Series events, but a lot of final defeats. And fair play to Peter Wright for what he's doing. He is now 51. He is the oldest player to have completed the set of the World Championship and the World Matchplay from those 5 players. He is making a late push to get into that top 10 to cement his legacy as one of the best ever. And I don't think he is far away at all, especially when you look at what he did this past week in Blackpool, those performances, the 110 average against Van Gerwen, what he did across the whole week, 104 average. I called it Taylor-esque. I don't think there's been many players that have been able to put together a run of performances like that across the long distance matches, as you mentioned. It was really impressive. And as I say, that the age as well to do it when he's done it at this age, when we're talking about players that are coming up, younger players in their mid-40s coming through the game like Jose de Souza. He's a player in his 50s and he looks like he's just getting better. So I think there are more majors to come from him. I personally think he's not in the top 10 just yet, if I'm being completely unbiased on the question. But I think if he goes and wins another world title like he's predicted already, or if he wins a World Grand Prix or a Grand Slam, ticks off another one of those big major titles in the PDC, then I think I might be in that 82%. He is very, very close now, I think, to being in that top 10.
Now, he beat the defending champion Dimitri Vandenberg in the final as the Belgian number 1 falls just short at the final hurdle in his bid to retain the Phil Taylor Trophy. But do you think this run has quieted some of the doubters that emerged after he won the title last year?
I have to say yes. I don't think there were many darts fans or pundits that were questioning Dimitri Vandenberg heading into this World Matchplay. His title defence, of course, playing at the Winter Gardens for the first time, and 12 months ago he won the title behind closed doors, because you just got to look at what he's done since he won that title 12 months ago. And okay, a lot of those events have still been behind closed doors. The semi-final at the Grand Slam, the great game he had with Dave Chisnell at the World Championship, putting in those really good performances. But since the fans have come back at the end of the Premier League, he's still produced some good darts. And you look at the Premier League as well, he tied a record, the most 100-plus averages in a debut season that was held by Michael van Gerwen. He also averaged 10 in that first season. Some of them were behind closed doors, some of them were with the fans. But he just seems to be a player that continues to progress, and it's not been a smooth ride for him the last 12 months. We spoke to him quite recently. You spoke to him during the Premier League season, and we talked about the knee injury that he had. He had the operation on it, the surgery to get it better. And okay, his performances didn't dip too much while he had the knee brace, but it was probably bugging him that he weren't able to be as free on stage. And we know he likes the dance moves as well. So once he's had that operation, I think we have seen him continue that progression, winning the Pro Tour title, getting to a final. And you just got to look at what he did last week, getting to the final, and the game against Gerwyn Price as well, how he dismantled the world number 1, the top seed, the tournament favourite at that point. He was the favourite with the bookmakers, the title sponsor Betfred. He did a real job on him, 16-9, and not like Gerwyn Price played really badly, still had a 98 average, but Dimitri just blew him away, and he is now in the top 5 in the world. He's pushing towards that top 4. He's not far away from that top 4 either. I think if there was any people questioning him, we've seen it last week. He's a player that loves the crowds. He always says it in his interviews afterwards if he's won and he gets interviewed, that he loves the crowd, and he's becoming a crowd favourite even more than he was before the pandemic. So I certainly think he's answered any of those doubters that were left wrong over these last 9 days.
Yeah, and I think that last point is the key one, is that there will always be doubters. There will always be people who question how good any player is. But what he proved this past week, which he didn't need to prove, I think if you look at how he's been over the last couple of years, he's already proven that he is one of the best players in the world. But even if there were still, and there are still some doubters out there, he put a final nail in their coffin to say, for their argument, that he isn't one of the best. He's now up to number 5 in the world. He's now 1 on the floor, which was the big critique against him. Somehow now there was the critique that, well, he did all this behind closed doors, completely ignoring that he won 2 World Youth titles, made a couple of World Championship quarterfinals, made a couple other major quarterfinals behind closed doors, not to mention a World Series final, some deep runs on the Euro Tour. We know he can play on stage in front of big crowds. This just was a little final icing on the cake, and the performances he had most of the week backed it up. Even that semifinal, which was his second lowest. His first time was the lowest average, but it was his second lowest average of the week. What was more impressive is how he lifted his game. He started very poorly in that and was 6-2 down. After that, okay, yes, Ratajski missed some darts at double and quite a few at times, but he pulled off runs of 8 legs in a row, and then when it looked like Ratajski was getting back into it, 7 legs in a row to win by 8, still averaging 98.5 in a game that he took the first 2 sessions basically off of. Dimitri Vandenberg proved that he is one of the best. That's why he's now up to number 5. That's why he's now one of the top players, even on the Pro Tour, on the floor events, where for the longest time he wasn't able to get the results. It's because he's just too good not to. Are there still doubters? Yeah, sure, there probably are, but they're wrong. The results show it, the ranking shows it, the belief that Dimitri Vandenberg has shows it. And he still has more to prove. And if that's what you want to say, you're right. Because his goal is not to be number 5 in the world, is not to be a World Matchplay champion. His goal is to be world champion and number 1. And there's no reason to believe he won't get there. So yeah, he still has more to prove. But that's not because he isn't yet one of the best players in the world. It's because his goal is to be the best. And he's not quite there yet.
Just to add on to the end of that as well, you mentioned that World Series final that he got to back in 2018. He averaged 109 in the first round. He beat Michael van Gogh and he beat Gary Anderson to make the final. How many people were in attendance that day? 20,210, according to Wikipedia, a record for a darts tournament. So, he's already proved it enough. But he's our first guest, and it is the newly crowned World Matchplay champion, Peter Wright.
I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the newly crowned World Matchplay champion, Peter Wright. Thanks for the time, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm good, Alex. Thank you very much. Just chilling out, Alex. Just chilling, mate. Just chilling.
Good stuff. Well, first of all, congratulations on Sunday's win. After the long drive from Blackpool back home to East Anglia on Monday, how have you spent the last few days?
Doing washing. We're about 10 days, 12 days of washing. So, and then obviously unpacking the car because we always take loads of stuff with us. And obviously we had Joe there. Obviously we went to London first and dropped her off for her back operation, and then she got an ambulance up to come and meet us out at Blackpool. So the car was chock-a-block.
Well, let's look back on the last week. 104 average for the tournament. Only Phil Taylor has averaged more in a World Matchplay. Just how proud are you of your week's work in Blackpool?
Yeah, there's some good averages there. Obviously, some of them didn't feel like they were good averages, but they were, And I had one bad one, which was 99. But yeah, I thought obviously I performed pretty steady throughout the tournament, which you've got to be consistent and steady to win tournaments. You can't just have flashes of brilliance in one round, do 110 in one round, and then do a 90 or 95, or you're going to get beat, 96, something like that. So you have to be pretty ultra consistent.
I know you're a player that sets a very high standard for yourself, but we've got to mention that semi-final against Michael van Gogh in the 110 average. Michael came back at you. He got it back to 2 legs a couple of times before you pulled away. I mean, looking back now, do you rate that as the best performance of your career?
It wasn't my best performance, but on TV, I suppose the way I felt and the way he played against me, and the way I dealt with him and answered his, of his game coming back at me, I done okay. But I played him in the straw tournament in the final the week before, and he had 106 average there, and I had 108. But he come back at me in that match, so I knew I'd plenty more to come. It's just whether it works on stage or not, you know.
And you were emotional after that win. You mentioned on Sky you promised your wife Jo that she could come to the Winter Gardens if you made the final. How much did that mean to you, having her with you in the crowd again for the final?
Yeah, obviously it meant a lot, obviously, but she's been through and everything's been horrible, and hopefully, you know, we're turning the corner. If not, we got to maybe have another back surgery if this one doesn't work. So, you know, she struggled to make it to the darts on that day, as well as she had a really bad morning and afternoon as well. So, but she obviously she didn't want to. Obviously, she wanted to be there and not let me down. But I did say to her, stay and watch it on TV. You're fine, you know. It's Mr. No, I want to be there. So it was dedicated to Jo, obviously. And obviously when I said that, you know, this trophy's for Jo, and then looked over and standing on the corner, and she just started bursting into tears, and then that obviously set me off. So it was her fault. I had it under control. Well, sort of under control. Yeah.
It was a lovely moment. And back to the semi-final, in the build-up, Sky played that clip of you saying that Michael won't win a TV title this year. I know you've since said that you think he will win one, but you faced him during that dominant spell that he had when he was winning 20, 25 titles a year. What do you think's missing from his game right now?
Obviously he's changed to a different dart company. Obviously he's moved, and with me, you know, me changing darts and everything, it doesn't really matter. But obviously for Michael, using a set of darts that he's used, you know, from so many years as a kid and everything, hasn't really changed. So to try and get another dart very similar to what he was using is difficult, because it'll never fly through the air the same, and it won't feel the same. So, you know, that's always missing from his game, and obviously his consistency. You know, he still plays some fantastic darts, and he's shown that. But, you know, he's not doing it for leg on leg, or bursts of, you know, 6, 7, 8 legs.
I don't know if you heard after the game, but a line that John Part said in the commentary during that game, he said that MVG is getting a taste of the dish that he served to Peter for so long. You've won the last 2 big meetings, I guess, the World Final, the World Matchplay semi-final. That must give you a lot of satisfaction to get those wins.
Yeah, obviously, you know, to beat Michael in any tournament, even if it's a fall tournament, or if it's Tiddlywinks, you know.
Do you play like that?
You know. Not yet, but we might do. So, but you know, just to beat Michael in general it's you know, it's very difficult, and you have to have the right mindset, and you've had to put the right sort of practice in, and you have the right belief. But yeah, I know from future for me, I think it's only going to get better against him. Obviously he's going to get better, or he's going to have to get better, because my standards are raising still. So that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, they definitely are. And the final was against Dimitri Vandenberg, and it's well known by now that he stayed at the right household during that first lockdown. What were your favourite memories, I guess, during that time when Dimitri stayed with you that have stuck with you?
He's just, you know, he's a young man, he's a gentleman, and he's hungry to be a champion. You know, he had the pleasure of me having the world champion trophy here, and him seeing it, you know, personally, and you know, and see what I've achieved in the darts, and you know, it just gave him a taste of, you know, I want some of this, he goes. So, but I know I need to put the hard work in, and you know, while he was here, you know, every night he was practicing, and that's why, you know, he went and won the match play. I wasn't practicing much, plus obviously behind closed doors, which I didn't enjoy. But he dealt with that, and then he proved in Blackpool it doesn't matter if it's behind closed doors or with a crowd, that he can still do both. And hats off to him. You know, he's a future world champion. He's already a double world champion, youth champion, but you know, it won't be long before he's lifting the big trophy up.
Absolutely, yeah, echo that. And we could tell after the final as well that the bond that you two have made during that lockdown, you've kept it. What's it like now on the tour, playing each other and still being very good friends off the hockey as well?
Obviously, it's very difficult because obviously you tell him, you give him advice as whether he takes the advice on certain things to do and certain shots and how I practice and whether he takes that into his game, which he has done. The same sort of practice routine to get ready. And obviously he's got his own stuff as well as that on top, I forgot what the question was now.
What's it like on the tour now? Obviously you're playing each other in a big final like you've just had, but obviously you're still good friends as well off the hockey, putting that to one side.
Yeah, we obviously when we are still good friends, but when it comes to playing a match, you got to forget all that. It's very difficult. You forget about you got bills to pay and stuff like that, and it's just survival of the fittest. Who can hit that double and game shot before the other man does.
Definitely. Well, we've got to give a mention to Lee at Red Dragon. I know he's been pestering you this week for us to set this chat up. He made the darts that won you the World Championship. I assume he made the darts that won you the World Matchplay. Which ones do you prefer?
I prefer these gold ones. Yeah, definitely.
And as we know, you've been known to tinker with your dart setup from time to time. I don't think many people talk about it. You're looking for that extra percent, but is part of it also to keep hungry? You've been playing darts for a long time now. Does it help with the motivation to try different sets of darts?
Yes, definitely. Obviously, I've tried many sets, and obviously I've gone back to these diamonds, but the coating on them and just the way they look in the board and they fly different completely. I don't know why, they just do. Even Simon at Red Dragon, he's thrown them and he goes, they just fly totally different. It's like crazy. Why? Suddenly got the gold coating on them and it's, I don't know what it is. But yeah, so but I did message Lee about tweaking them, so I might have a set that's very similar to them but tweaked from the front, and just to see, just get it out of my head, see if I do, it might improve it even more, so we'll see.
We shall see. Well, let's look ahead then. A lot of talk since you won on Sunday about the world number one spot, obviously occupied by Going Price at the moment. I don't know if you've been made aware, but provisionally you're now £750 behind Going for that provisional spot of the top seed at Ali Pali. Have you got your eye on that?
What, winning the Ali Pali again? I've already said I'll be ready, fired up to win that. But yeah, I can get to number one by the fall I'm in. As I say, I'm only going to get better over the next couple of weeks. So as long as you get a little bit of luck, somebody misses a double or something like that to take you out, and then you punish them. Why can't I go and win the Grand Prix? And why can't I go and retain the Europeans and and the Grand Slam as well? So I've been to the final twice, and so what?
Oh, there's only been 10 number ones in the PDC, no Scotsman yet. What would it mean to you to get to the top of the rankings?
No, I didn't know that. So yeah, I'm going to push even further now to make sure. So yeah, I'll definitely get to number one.
Oh, you can have that one on us. Well, speaking of Scotland, the last time we spoke, you caught me by surprise when you said that you wouldn't be playing for Scotland in the World Cup. It's coming up soon in September. Have you made a decision on that one yet?
Yeah, I'm definitely playing. We want to get that back, and fingers crossed. Hopefully, Gary's going to play as well. But that's down to Gary. But we did have talks, and at the time time he said, yeah, but, things change. So hopefully, fingers crossed, me and Gaz can go and get our trophy back.
Another title that you've won before that you'll be defending, of course, is the European Championship. We don't know much information about that event. Have you guys had any info yet on where that's going to be or any dates yet for that?
Well, no, I don't know where that's going to be or any dates. Same as what you know, nothing at all. So all I know, I think there's only going to be like 2 Europeans. What was it, in Budapest and Gibraltar? That's all I know, and that's it. So and where they hold it, we don't know. Hopefully, all the stuff lift up in Germany and everything like that. So we go over there.
Let's hope so. Well, on our show this week, we've been discussing the top 10 debate again, and where you now positioning that. I'm not going to ask you where you think you are, but 2 years ago you had the UK Open, you had a few World Series. Since then you've picked up a lot of big titles: the World Championship, the World Cup, the Masters, the European Championship, the World Matchplay. You've had a big surge the last couple of years of these big titles. You must be pleased with how the last couple of years have gone.
Yeah, obviously I'm still glad. Obviously just glad that I'm enjoying the game and playing against the best players in the world, and upsetting a few of them for a guy who just like the darts for fun, and to entertain the crowd, and just that's my main job. And if I can pick up some titles on the way through, enjoy myself, that's a bonus.
Glad to hear. Well, when we spoke at your old home in Mendham 6 years ago now, you mentioned that you wanted to play until you were 60. Is that still the plan?
I'm going to play until, I'm fed up with it. It might be 65, it might be 70, Probably the cost of stage at that age, though. Zimmer frame, maybe.
Well, the restrictions they're easing in England now. Last night, the league that I play in, the Stowmarket Darts League, we had our first game in 18 months, and I won 2 of my 3 games. I think I'm ready for a rematch. Will you do me the honour of playing me again?
Yeah, of course we can organise something. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll get that organised.
Good man. As long as we don't have any more 132 checkouts from you, and you let me get under 300, that'd be nice.
We'll see. You've improved then. And I've improved since as well, so
look forward to it. And last one before we let you go, a question from my co-host Burton, who lives in America. I should give you a bit of background. When you won the World Championship, he was on holiday in Mexico. When you won the World Matchplay, he was in holiday on Mexico. So he asked me to ask you, will you fly him to Mexico for all the big tournaments now that you've won the big titles when he's been there?
That's very good. Make sure when I'm at the World Championships, he's in Mexico. Okay.
All right. I shall pass that message on to him.
I'll send him by freight.
I'm sure he'll appreciate that. Well, Peter, it's always an immense pleasure to have some of your time. I'm very grateful for it, and congratulations again on the win. And I'll keep on the practice board as long as you do, and I look forward to that game very soon.
All right, then, Alex. Thank you very much. Thanks for chatting.
Thanks again to Peter for joining us. Now let's continue our chat about the World Matchplay. Looking back, a first PDC major semi-final for Krzysztof Ratajski. Michael van Gerwen's wait for a first title in 2021 goes on. But what did you make of the 2 beaten semi-finalists in Blackpool last week?
I'll start with Michael van Gerwen. It's very rare that we can say this, but he didn't do that much wrong. He did miss, as I said earlier, some doubles, especially early in the match, that could have put some pressure under Peter Wright. But the way Peter was playing, averaging 115 until we were 2/3 through that match, I don't think it would have made much of a difference. I think Peter Wright was going to win that match no matter what happened that 10, unless Van Gerwen was throwing in 10 darters with the darts and 9 darters against them every leg. Even Michael van Gerwen at his best doesn't do that every leg. So for Van Gerwen, it was one of those rare times where when it was all said and done, yeah, he could have done a little bit more, but he wasn't winning that match no matter what he did. So he can probably take some positives out of this tournament because he did win 3 matches. He did what he had to do. He picked up his game when he needed to, especially in those early rounds when he was under some trouble. And he just ran into someone who, on the day and on the week, was playing at a standard that Van Gogh was not able, or no one would have been able to put up with for 27 legs. For Krzysztof Ratajski, it's weird saying that his best result so far in a PDC major, at least, should be viewed a little bit as a disappointment, because he had Dimitri for the taking in that match. He was 6-2 up, and he was first to a double in half of the next 8 legs, and he didn't win any of them. And then, he got back into it, got it to 10-9, but it was a similar story where he had chances. He created chances. He was, from the scoring phase and often the setup phase, the better player, but couldn't get it done. This was a huge opportunity for him to get to the final, and based on the way he'd played in the early rounds, he could have at least, stayed with Peter Wright, and possibly, if he hit his double, ran him close and maybe even won. He's good enough. We know he is. But it has to be viewed as just a missed opportunity, because Dimitri was there for the taking, and Ratajski just didn't take it. We'll see how he bounces back from this. Yeah, it's weird speaking negatively of someone who just had their best ever performance in a PDC major, to do it in the second biggest and the second most important to boot, especially when he was one of the seeds that many people were saying was going to get knocked out in the first round, as he went against the top Pro Tour qualifier, Brendan Dolan. But he had a chance to make the final, to get into the Grand Slam, to possibly, if he beat Peter Wright, to get into the Premier League next year. And he had the chance, and he just didn't take it. So I think it's actually a little bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you on that. And when he got through that quarterfinal against Callum Ridge with quite a bit to spare, we were thinking this could be the weekend for Krzysztof Ratajski. This could be the weekend where he makes a big final, or he goes on and wins the title, because he was playing pretty well across his first 3 games. He was doing what he usually does, averaging in the high 90s or the low hundreds, and he was just a very tough player to beat, a good match play player, if you like, if you pardon the pun, on the tournament we've just seen. But yeah, like you say, the semi-final, he just threw it away, didn't he? He was 6-2 up, he was 6 out of 10 on the doubles, he was averaging in that 100 range, I think 105 at one point early on in the game, and I don't know what happened, but his doubles just absolutely deserted him. He went from 6 out of 10, and then he went on a run of 0 out of 12, and he was 9-6 down. And the 2 streaks during that game, I think Dimitri won 8 legs to go 10-6 up from 6-2 down, and then from 10-9 he won 7 legs in a row. And when you think back to it, it was 6-2 to Krzysztof Ratajski. Dimitri Vandenberg, he's won 15 legs to Krzysztof's 15-3 run. It's just something that you can't let happen, especially in these big games. And unfortunately for him, I don't know what happened, but whether it's a lack of experience in these big stages in the PDC, I don't know, but he really did lose the plot in that game, and hopefully he is able to bounce back from it, because he is still pushing up those rankings. He's up to number 11, not got a lot to defend in terms of the big TV events from 2 years ago, so we could see him crack the top 8 this year. So hopefully he gets over that result quickly. With Michael van Gerwen, as we said, the wait goes on for him to win that first title. A few of our listeners are now getting on board with Michael being the new handicapper's nightmare, because as we saw at this tournament, he is a player that does go up and down, even in games, even across a whole game, a whole tournament, from game to game. His average goes up and down. He's not the consistent player that he once was, and even that semi-final, he played some of his best darts that we've seen for a while, to get to 11-9 down, 12-10 down against Peter Wright, that was just playing out of his skin. So for Michael to get it that close was testament to him, but he just couldn't quite keep it going for the rest of the game, and ended up losing 17-10. But it's another big performance that's put Michael van Gerwen out. I think that's the only way that he can look at it, is that players are playing some of their best ever performances to put him out. So yes, he's not able to reach those heights himself. We're not seeing him get to the 110 averages like Peter did in that game. He needs to find another gear, I think, to win another title, especially these big titles, because if he doesn't, the other players are capable of doing it, as we've seen with Peter Wright.
Now, we've talked about the semi-finalists and obviously the champion and runner-up, but let's talk about the tournament as a whole. We kind of previewed this question last week when we had our mid-tournament review, but 3 additional rounds followed. Any change to what you would say were the match and the moment of the tournament?
Well, I've got to start off by saying, and we both said this after we finished recording, and we put last week's mid-match play episode out, we both said we forgot to mention Rod Studd, who you're going to hear from in a moment, back in the commentary box for Sky Sports for the first time since he suffered a stroke in May last year. So it's been a long time for him, as he says in a few moments' time between drinks, a long time since he was doing the commentary on the big Sky event. So that's definitely one of the moments of the tournament for me, hearing him back in the box, because he's one of the best there is for darts, in my opinion, and I think a lot of our listeners would agree with that. In terms of matches of the tournament, I think when we recorded our last episode, just after the second round, we'd had a couple of great nights of darts. We'd seen a few close games. We'd seen the Michael Smith Jose de Sousa game, which turned out to be the only game that went to extra time, the extra legs. We'd had Gary Anderson, Nathan Aspinall, which went close. The Rob Cross, Callum Ridds game, Dimitri Vandenberg, Dave Chisnell. But after that, it was a lot of one-sided games. And okay, there was some games that had a lot of drama in them. Of course, the Going Price, Dimitri Vandenberg quarter-final, which we're probably going to touch on a bit later in one of our listener questions. The Peter Wright, Michael Van Gerwen game, just how well Peter Wright played in that game. And I'm going to go with the Callum Ridds, Rob Cross game, because that, out of all the games that we saw last week and into the weekend before, that was one of the games that really did swing from one direction to the other. We had Rob Cross 5-2 up, missing those darts to go 7-2 up, and every credit to Callum Ridds, because he had the 4 bullseye checkouts. I've made a note of him, 86 on the ball to put it back to 4-5 after Rob missed 3 darts at a double. 2 legs later, he had a 89 on the ball. Again, Rob Cross missed a couple of darts at a double. And then the very next leg, back-to-back legs, he had the bullseye checkout, 92 on the ball to go 7-5 up. Let's not forget Rob Cross. He had a 1-3-2 checkout in that game as well late on, and Callum with the 170 on the ball to go 10-8 up, and then getting over the line in the next leg 11-8. This is a player that still very new to the big stages in the PDC, these big TV tournaments, but it was his debut. He put out the guy that won it 2 years ago, come back from behind. I think that's going to be the match that I'll remember the most, and the moment it's got to be Peter Wright lifting the title as well, especially given that where he is in his career at the moment, where he is right now, he's done well to get that title, and just the overall week of performances from him is something that, as a Peter Wright fan, you're not going to forget.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what you said about Rod Studd. Just slipped both of our minds. I had it in my notes for the show last week, and there were so many highlights from the first week that I just skipped over that one and didn't mention it. And for that, I apologize, but I hope we make it up to Rod by having him on this week and mentioning that was one of the highlights of the tournament. But there weren't that many highlights after the second round. And you touched on it, and for other people to touch on it, there were almost no close matches other than a few of the first round and a few of the second round matches. The only person to get to double figures in his defeat was Jose de Sousa in the second round. And if you play all the scheduled legs in the second round, you can't even get to double figures in defeat. That had to go to extra time to do it, even though there were 7 matches in the last 3 rounds where you could have easily reached double figures and still lost comfortably. And that tells you just how one-sided most of those last 7 matches were. That said, there were still some storylines that we mentioned earlier on the show, the Dimitri Vandenberg Christopher Tyskie match. It's amazing to think that neither of them reached double figures, with how there were, in essence, 4 different matches in that match. You had the early stage where Tyskie got up 6-2 and probably should have got up more. Then you had Dimitri reeling off 7 legs in a row. You have Christoph coming right back at him and reeling off the next 3 to get back within 1. Dimitri then goes and wins another 7 in a row to win at 17-9. But I think the match of the tournament, I'm going to have to say the Michael Smith Jose de Sousa match. I think that was just really an all-time classic of the Winter Guardian stage. Also a match that was back and forth. Also a match where both of them had every chance to win it. And we talked a lot about it last week because Michael Smith hit some just absolutely brilliant shots. And he didn't follow it up the rest of the tournament, unfortunately for him. Not that the way Peter Wright was playing, you would think he could have if he did push Peter Wright, you think Peter Wright would have done what he did in the other matches and just average 110. But I think that Smith-De Sousa match was the match of the tournament. The Anderson-Aspinall match, also in the second round, up there as well. You mentioned Cross Ridds, a great match. But one other that I'll throw out there for match of the tournament and also for moment of the tournament is the semifinal between Wright and Van Gerwen. And so I should have said more than 10 legs, because Van Gerwen did hit 10 in the end. But boy, that performance from Peter Wright. He was averaging 115 for most of that match. And okay, he missed those 5 darts at double, and Van Gerwen made his little mini run, and that lowered the average a bit, but he still averaged 110 over 27 legs. That is brilliant stuff. That's stuff that at this stage of the tournament, we've almost never seen before. The Adrian Lewis, Phil Taylor final in 2013 is about the only time we've seen players averaging it to that level at this stage of the tournament. And Peter Wright, you have to think, should have averaged a bit more. He tailed off in that match to average 110 against his main rival, against the person who so many times has knocked him out at this stage or in the final with something big like this was on the line. Peter Wright just destroyed him from start to finish. That was the moment of the tournament and one of the matches of the tournament because it was just something we hadn't seen from Peter Wright before. A ruthlessness, a relentlessness, and just a brilliance that it's strange saying that for someone who has a world title, who now has 4 majors, but we hadn't seen to that level before. He just was fantastic, and it was at its peak against the player who he needed it to be the most against.
And now move on to our next guest on this week's show, and it is with the Sky Sports commentator who made his return at the World Matchplay, Rod Studd.
I'm joined by Sky Sports commentator Rod Studd. Rod, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you guys?
I can't speak for Alex. I'll let him answer in a second, but I'm doing well, and thank you for joining us. And first of all, last week at the World Matchplay, return to the Winter Gardens after a year away, full crowd after a year without a crowd. But I think most importantly of all, we had Rod Studd back in the commentary box for Sky Sports. How do you reflect on the last week or so?
You're very kind. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a great week. It was good to be back from my perspective, and good to be back seeing my friends at Sky Sports Darts and being in and amongst all the darting fraternity again. So all in all, it was very good. And of course, Peter Wright played absolutely brilliantly from the get-go and was a tremendous winner of the match play, and one of the best I think we've ever had.
Yeah, you mentioned Peter Wright winning the title. Snaky, as you like to call him, winning the World Matchplay, 104 average for the tournament. Can we call it Taylor-esque? Because not many have performed like that over a whole week.
I think we definitely can. I mean, dare we say it? But it was, wasn't it? I mean, it was a performance of the utmost excellence all the way through the tournament. Consistently, composed, just really top draw stuff, world-class stuff from match 1 right through to the final. And that demolition of Dimitri Vandenberg, who put a very stout defence of his title up, but couldn't live with Peter Wright on that evening, that Sunday evening in Blackpool. But yeah, I think Peter, with that tournament average of, 104, 105 and the 110 against Van Gerwen in the semi-final, and the brilliant performance against Cullen also on his CV in that particular tournament, I think he can rightfully pat himself on the back and say, yeah, that was pretty much like Phil Taylor used to do in Blackpool for so many years, 16 times in fact. But, I sometimes think that Peter doesn't get the credit he deserves because whilst he's attired pretty flashily, his darts often isn't that flash. It's just, brilliantly, consistently excellent. And a bit like Taylor used to be, And sometimes we give more praise to the flashy players who go 11, 12, 13, 11, 12, 13 in a burst, and don't give the credit to someone who goes 15, 14, 15, 14 dart legs all the way through matches, all the way through tournaments in this case. So I think sometimes Peter doesn't get the credit he deserves. But let's start giving him some, eh?
And you mentioned that the credit he deserves. And on this show this week, we talked about whether we thought that this win put Peter in the top 10 of all time. Was he in your top 10 of all time before this title? And if not, do you think this might lift him up into it?
Possibly not. It's a very difficult debate, isn't it? Because you're talking about comparing players from different eras who played different opponents with different equipment at different times. And it's very difficult to say, to right up the very top, if Eric Bristow was better than Phil Taylor, was better than Michael Van Gerwen when they played over what amounts to 40 years of darts between the three of them, if you take Eric back from 1980 onwards to Michael now playing in 2021. And so if you're going to compare Peter with, I don't know, put names at random, John Lowe, Jockey Wilson, John Part. So it's difficult, but by winning this championship alongside his world title, he goes into a very select group, doesn't he? Which we saw Rob Cross join a couple of years ago, Gary Anderson 3 years ago, Phil Taylor obviously with 16 match plays and 16 world titles, and Michael Van Gerwen as well. So that's a very select group, and I think that catapults you into a conversation about the elite of the game throughout its history if you've won both of them. I mean, if he can add the Premier League, there's even fewer in that little group as well. Who've won the Premier League, the World Matchplay and the World Championship. But I think they're the big two, the World Championship and the World Matchplay, really. And who's to say he won't add a second world title, which would hoist him up into the conversation still further, wouldn't it? And, looking at it now, and it's difficult because we're in July and we've got to catapult our minds forward to December and January, and who knows what might be happening there. I mean, Van Gerwen might be back on song and Peter might not be playing as well. But at the moment, bookmakers have certainly got him in and amongst the favourites for the World Championship in December and January.
And another player who will be contending for that title will be Dimitri Vandenberg. He backed up his title winning the World Matchplay 12 months ago by reaching the final at the weekend, now in the top 5 in the world. How far do you think he can go?
Well, I was very impressed with Dimitri Vandenberg for a number of reasons. But, trying to defend a title, trying to win a big title is difficult. Trying to defend it is even more difficult. And he got within one win of doing so. And he played really well along the way, didn't he? The win over Gerwyn Price, one of the highlights of the week, really, I thought. And I also thought the way he dealt with a difficult situation against Krzysztof Ratajski was most impressive. He was in a hole in that match early on, wasn't he? But he never panicked whatsoever and always believed he was better than Krzysztof and would get himself out of the hole he'd got himself into. And boy, did he do so with runs of like 8 legs on the trot and so on. And I was very impressed with Dimitri, particularly his temperament. In the end, his doubling let him down a bit. And it let him down in previous matches, but he got away with it. But he couldn't get away with it against Peter Wright, not the way Peter was playing. But yes, Dimitri, very impressive. And certainly now, as you mentioned, up into the top 5 in the world, how much further could he go? Well, Wayne Mardell, who likes to make provocative comments, reckons he can be a future world number 1. And, difficult to argue too strongly against Wayne there, because certainly he wouldn't have to improve very much on what he showed in the last 12 months to be in that conversation with the players above him in the rankings a little older in years. And, Michael Van Gerwen, I'm not going to say he's in decline because that would be nonsense. Certainly not playing at the level that we're used to seeing him play at. So Dimitri will have a chance over the next couple of years, if he carries on playing as he is, of overtaking at least some of the players above him in the rankings. So it will be interesting to see how he gets on. And we were just chatting about the World Championship, some of the Sky guys after the tournament. And really, you could name, or any one of us that follows darts with any degree of scrutiny could probably name 4 players now and not get any in the semi-final at all, because I think personally this is the most wide open World Championship I can remember. And it will be interesting to see how things pan out in the build-up, because there's a lot of big tournaments coming up between now and when we reconvene at Alexandra Palace, which we hope will be in front of a full house, which will be absolutely magical. And we'll see how Gerwyn Price gets on defending his title down there.
Now, back to you for a minute. We mentioned your return to the Sky team after you suffered a stroke last May. What do you recall from that time and the first few days and weeks after it happened?
Well, not a lot really. I mean, I remember it happening, and then I knew that Louise, my wife, had very prudently rung an ambulance straight away, and I knew I was being taken to hospital. But I can't remember much about that, nor the first couple of days in hospital. But I remember being in hospital and getting used to the situation, and then starting rehab in hospital, and then coming home last June and continuing with rehab. And then since then, really, it's been a build-up to try and get myself fit enough to get back to work, and I didn't really know when that would be. But I'm delighted it was in Blackpool, which is my favourite tournament, and I was delighted to be back when the crowds were coming back too, because it really did feel like darts was back as well. And so that was great. I'm really pleased to be back. And looking forward to getting fitter and stronger in the months and weeks ahead. And looking forward to building up through the tournaments that are on Sky in the next few months up to the World Championship. That's my aim, is to be back down there enjoying the World Championship.
Good to hear. Well, you've had the support of your family as well as a lot of support from the World of Darts fans, fellow colleagues at Sky, players. When you saw those messages coming through, what did it mean to you to see so many people wishing you well in your recovery?
Yeah, I'm very grateful. I really am. And all of those messages made a real difference, because, when I was at a low ebb, they just picked me up a bit. So I get a bit emotional if I'm not careful. But no, it was all those messages really made a difference. And I'm very grateful to each and everybody who took the trouble to message me or write to me or send me messages via social media. and it all helped in the rehab process. So thank you.
Now, just before the match play, we did hear you commentate a little bit on the Pro Tour at the last Players' Championship event before the cutoff. Was that your idea to come back with some floor events?
No, it wasn't my idea, actually, and I've got to be very grateful to Matt Porter, the CEO of the PDC. It was his suggestion, really, that, would it be helpful if I could do a little bit of a run out doing some of the streaming with the PDC, and I thought that was a good idea. And so I as you mentioned, I did one of the one of the Players' Championships in Coventry, and I'm very grateful to Dan Dawson, Chris Murphy, and Paul Nicholson who helped me through it. It was just basically to have a bit of a run out before the Sky tournament that was coming up the following week, and just to give my voice a bit of an exercise and just get used to being in front of a microphone again. And it was a very useful exercise. It made a big difference. So I'm very grateful to Matt and to Chris, Dan, and Paul for A, suggesting it, and B, helping me through it, because it was it had been a long time, but it had been a long time between drinks. To use a phrase, but I was glad I did it, and it really helped. And it was also good to see a number of the players and some of the PDC staff down in Coventry as well, just to say hello again, because obviously it had been a long time since I'd been anywhere near a darts tournament, so it was good.
Yeah, it was a nice surprise to hear you do those events. And during your time off, were you still following the events as closely as ever? And apart from Wayne Mardell losing his voice when Jose hit the three tops in the Premier League, what moments have stood out for you during, I guess, the closed doors era of darts?
Yeah, I was still watching it, although you've got to hand it to the PDC, for keeping the plate spinning. But it wasn't darts as we know it, and that was nobody's fault. It was just how it was, wasn't it? It was the pandemic that brought that situation on, and it was good to see any kind of darts. But having the fans back, that's what darts is, and they're such an important part. And it's so good to see them back, and long may that continue. Now, hopefully, we're moving into an era now where fans will be part of the game once more, and we'll move back to some kind of normality. That's what we're all hoping for, obviously. I thought, really, Dimitri's win of the match play in Milton Keynes behind closed doors, I thought was absolutely epic. I thought he played brilliantly that week. Obviously, the performances of Jose de Sousa certainly stand out, because he really catapulted himself to be one of the great characters of the game, didn't he? By his performances in the Premier League and the Grand Slam of darts. And, we've discovered a new entertainer really there. Some of his madcap play and some of his miscounting have, entertained us as much as his 180 hitting in many ways. So I was thrilled to see, because it's always good to see a new face coming through, particularly in such spectacular style. So that was really entertaining. It really was. And Dimitri's win, as I mentioned, in the match play. But, I think the highlights will come thick and fast now. We're back in front of the crowds.
Touched on this next question that I'm going to ask a little bit earlier, where you mentioned just how wide open the World Championship appears right now. And obviously that's because there isn't a clear-cut world number one or even world number 2, 3, or 4 right now. But we also had a bunch of first-time major winners during the lockdown. You mentioned De Sousa and Dimitri, but also Johnny Clayton winning his first, second, and third majors. Do you think, though, with crowds coming back, that we'll continue to see a lot of players have breakthroughs and it remain as wide open as it's been?
That's the interesting question. And, I've discussed this with a lot of people quite recently, because the biggest question we have at the moment in darts is, will what I would call empty room darts form translate into what you could loosely term real darts form? And, we saw some quite strange results in snooker as well, similarly with behind closed doors snooker tournaments, obviously being run by a matchroom sport, really. So it's similar people managing to put events on, but with strange results. So the question is, because we know that there are a lot of players that can play to a very decent level behind closed doors, but there are fewer players, I believe, that can play to that very decent level in front of a crowd. And the question is, will the players like Jose, Johnny Clayton, who you rightly mentioned, and the question was, would Dimitri do it as well? But he's answered that really last week. So will those players continue? Will Van Gerwen burst back into form in front of the big crowds and the TV cameras on the big stages? He showed a small glimpse of that against Peter Wright when he played very well, but not well enough in the semi-final. But prior to that, he'd been underwhelming, I thought, at the match play, in getting into trouble against Damon Hector and then being very underwhelming in subsequent victories as well. But we'll see what happens with that. That's the big question. Who will stand up in front of the TV cameras? I mean, Gerwyn Price won the World Championship in front of nobody, but I don't think there's any doubt that Gerwyn Price is more than capable in playing in front of a crowd after back-to-back wins in the Grand Slam of darts and reaching the latter stages of the Worlds the previous time when he lost to Peter Wright in the semis. So it will be interesting to see what happens. I think the best three players before the lockdown and behind closed doors started were Price, Wright and Van Gerwen. And if you're asking me who I think will be the best again, I think ultimately certainly Wright and Price and Van Gerwen probably, if he can get back to anything like, I think they'll be the big three again. And that will be good, really. In other sports, we've seen that happen, haven't we, when we've seen like 3 or 4 players all really playing at the top of their game. I'm thinking really in my mind about tennis when we had Nadal, Federer, Djokovic. Murray was in the mix for a while as well. So when those 4 were at the top of their game, really competing at the latter stages of Grand Slam tournaments, that was an epic era, vintage era for tennis. And, you know, maybe we'll see that in darts with Price, Van Gerwen, Wright, and maybe another 1 or 2 thrown into the mix, maybe Jose de Sousa, maybe Dimitri, and a real sort of battle between an elite group of players for the big major tournaments. And that will be good. I think that will be good if there's a real competitive feel to the back end of tournaments. And I think we'll probably have that over the next months.
And lastly, the next event on Sky will be the World Cup in September. We don't know yet if Peter Wright and Gary Anderson will make a return for Scotland, but who do you fancy as the main contenders for that title?
Well, you'd have to say the favourites are going to be Wales, aren't they, having won it? But not just that they've won it, but as you've mentioned, Johnny Clayton's been in superb form over the last 12 months or so, and Gerwyn Price, the world number 1 and world champion. So they make a formidable pairing, don't they? They'll be the favourites, I'm sure. Of course, at the moment, as we're speaking, not all the teams are in any way confirmed. I mean, gone are the days when it used to be, you know, Barney and Michael Van Gerwen, Taylor and Lewis, when they were kind of like set in stone and were competing at the back end of all the World Cups. And you could probably nail it down to either the Netherlands or England, but it's nothing like that now. Wales will be favourites, I'm sure. The Scottish team, you know, it depends who decides to travel, who will play, as to how confident you could be about Scotland's chances. And it looks like Van Duijvenbode and Michael Van Gerwen for the Netherlands in a sort of new development. It'd be interesting to see how they got on, for sure. I mean, there have been Michael's played with a number of different players, hasn't he? Jermaine Watamina fairly recently as well. But it'll be interesting to see how he gets on if it's Van Duijvenbode and Van Gerwen. But again, I think it's probably more wide open than normal, that competition. Although, if you ask me to name one team, I'll go for Wales.
Well, Rod, thank you so much for joining, and glad that you're getting back to top health, and hope to hear you back on commentary in the coming months.
Great, you're very kind. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again to Rod for joining us. Now moving away from the World Matchplay to events going forward. The PDC have cancelled the European Tour 4 and 5 tour card qualifiers, which were due to take place, I believe, next week. Is this a clear sign that we won't be getting more than 3 Euro Tours this year?
Yeah, I think it is. And, you know, there's a couple factors that go into it. There's still uncertainty, and especially with the Delta variant, there's a little bit more uncertainty, and much of mainland Europe still has significant travel restrictions and significant attendance restrictions, and trying to arrange fairly short notice events to add to the calendar in countries that don't have the same darts infrastructure and sport status as the UK or Germany is difficult. It doesn't seem like that's going to be likely to get done on short notice. The other thing is there's just not that much room in the calendar as we get to the back end of the year. Most years, October, November, it's pretty much just televised events. Maybe one Euro Tour event, the last one will get snuck in there. If there's any Players' Championship events, they're on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, not at the weekend. There's just not that room in the calendar, and that's even true this year. It might be a little bit more room, but we still have 2 2 weekends that get covered by the World Grand Prix. We still have the World Series of Darts final. We still have the European Championship. We still have the Grand Slam of Darts, which again covers 2 weekends because it's a full week event. And then you have the Players' Championship finals. That's 7 weekends that's accounted for of the 9 over those 2 months. There's just, and Euro Tour's filling the rest. So where are you going to put it in the calendar? There's just not the room, especially if we still don't have that third one confirmed. So yeah, I think it's a sign that there's not going to be more than 3. There's the logistical hurdle of arranging them, but there's also the logistical hurdle of getting them on the calendar, and there's just not room at that time of year.
Not just the 4th and 5th Euro Tours that were penciled in, even the 3rd Euro Tour, we don't have a date or a venue for that. But what about the European Championship? That's something that, just having a look at the PDC calendar on their website at the moment, is currently missing. And going through the schedule from September onwards, of course, August, they've got a few Players' Championship events next week. And after that, for a lot of the players, well, on the main tour anyway, the rest of August is going to be off for them. We're going to see the Women's Series, which got announced today when we're recording, the Development Tour, the Challenge Tour. They're going to get started up in August, but aside from that, we're going to be going again in September, and there is not a lot of a room for the European Tour events that haven't been scheduled, or even the European Championship. And that is something that, of course, has been a staple on the calendar for the last 12, 13 years. It's difficult to see where they're going to squeeze these events in. We have had the European Challenge Tour, Euro Tour qualifiers. I believe the 3rd qualifier finished last night when we're recording, so those have been finished, but we've got a player that's qualified for that, but we don't know yet where the 3rd one's going to be. I don't know whether they're going to be able to squeeze that 3rd one in, or whether they're just going to have to try and have the 2 events and then squeeze in the European Championship. There's a lot of work to do for the guys in the PDC now that we are heading back to some form of normality here in the UK. But as you say, a European Tour, you are heading outside of the UK for that, and there's different rules for different countries at the moment. We've seen, away from the PDC, the Dutch Open run by the WDF, the biggest open in world darts, was supposed to take place in September. That has been unfortunately cancelled. That's now going to be going ahead back in its regular slot in February next year, but that's a big blow for them, and I guess a sign really of how things are going in other countries. So yeah, it's definitely a concern, I think, where we're going to see these European Tour events happen, and as well the European Championship.
And now we'll move on to our final guest on this week's show, and it's with Jared Cole.
I'm pleased to say I'm joined by the newly crowned Mad Global Champion, Jared Cole. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Still over the moon, so can't put it into words how I'm feeling right now.
Well, let's start off with this past weekend. You defeated Wayne Warren 11-2 to take home the Mad Global belt. How special was last Friday night in Manchester?
I mean, the moment lives in my head, like, without fail, every day. I wake up and I still can't believe it. To say Wayne was an incredible champion, a video world champion as well. Like, it's not every day that you get to say things like that, and especially to win. Wow, what a feeling.
And I want to rewind back to March when the online qualifiers took place for you to get that shot at Wayne's belt. You had a couple of close games in that one, 11-10 against Rhys Davies, 11-9 against Jamie Lewis in the final. How tough was that day to get through?
It was pretty tough. I mean, I had to play, I believe it was four very tough opponents to get my opportunity to play that. And yeah, not one game was easy. I had to play right on my game the whole day, and yeah, it was grueling. But as you say, the last couple of games went all the distance as well. It was just wow. Couldn't believe it when I got the opportunity, and now I've won it. I'm like, wow.
And it's been quite a wait to get that title shot. Originally, the Contenders Finals was supposed to be in April. It got pushed back to July. How much have you been itching to get that opportunity to play, Wayne?
I mean, it was something that you dream of, and then when it actually comes around, it's like, you've got to make this count. You've got to make this, and it's just, wow, it's something that you can't really compare yourself for. Like, a world title opportunity, it doesn't come around every now and again. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I'm so happy I took it.
And it was one of the first events to be put on since the restrictions were lifted here in England, so you had a crowd in for Friday night as well. Can you remember the last time before that you'd played in front of fans?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, when I won my European title and my Fender Darts Untitled, there was a crowd there. Apart from that, it's generally behind the scenes with the PDC floor tournaments. And the UK Open, actually, 2018, I believe it was. It's probably the last time I played in front of a proper crowd.
A long time, and fair to say it couldn't have gone much better for you, dropping just the 2 legs to win it. We know, obviously, Wayne can play better than he did, and 86 average for yourself, you'll probably say that there's a few more gigs that you could have got through, but when you have such a big lead in a game like that, how hard is it to stay focused?
I mean, obviously, your drive is the fact that there's World Title on the line. So you try to block out how you're feeling until the match is over. But yeah, I mean, I knew that Wayne was far from his best on Friday night and sort of just didn't get comfortable, and I took full advantage of it. I knew that I was in control, and I just had to keep doing what I was doing. So I just carry on, and you should be okay, was my mindset for the most of the game.
Still very early days, you only won the title last week, but has there been any early indication on when you're going to be defending it? Has anyone reached out to you, your management, to say that they want to play you, or have Mad said anything yet?
Not official names, but I've heard there's a few people that are interested. I don't know their names yet. I'm leaving that to my management to sort out. But yeah, I can't wait to defend the title. Obviously, I'm over the moon to have it, but a true champion defends it, so I'm looking forward to that.
Definitely. Well, let's switch away from Mad. You only turned 21 last month, but you've been around the darts scene, particularly the Development Tour, since 2016 for a little while. Where did it all start for you in darts?
Where did it start? Probably birthday when I got a magnetic dartboard. Properly playing county youth at 9, and then senior county at 14 was probably the most significant part of my early darting career. Obviously getting picked for England at 17 and sort of having a really good year that year, winning my European titles, was, again, that was a massive moment for me, and it made me believe that I could be one of the best and sort of kick on.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on some of those titles that you won during your youth career, if you like, the WDF Europe Youth Cup, the Finder Masters you mentioned earlier as well, titles won away from the UK, one in Sweden, I believe, one in the Netherlands. What do you remember about those wins?
Knowing that I had to play well. I mean, that's always been my attitude. I try to sort of play down every situation I'm in. I don't like to sort of hype it up. I just like to try and throw darts and keep calm. But I mean, yeah, in front of the people, in front of the crowd, the people I'm playing as well, it's a bit surreal sometimes. Like, it seems a little bit unbelievable. Like, sort of, it's things you dream of when you're younger, and to actually have those opportunities is incredible.
Touching on the PDC Development Tour as well, you played on it pretty much as soon as you turned 16, a few months later. Were you keen to get on the tour as soon as you were old enough to test yourself on that?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, the Development Tour has had so many of the best players find their feet in the Development Tour. Like, the top players of nowadays, like Dimitri, like Michael Smith, they all came through the Development Tour at their stepping stones, and I believe it's the way forward to get to the top.
Another stepping stone to get to the top is, of course, Q-Score, and start of 2018 you made your first appearance in that. How did you find that, walking into that room with around 400, 500 people and some big names there as well?
A little bit daunting. I mean, the first time, obviously, I'm a young, upcoming dart player, and sort of you're walking into a room full of the best players without a professional card. Like, you're looking at the room and you're seeing world champions and people that you can only dream of meeting, let alone playing, and you're there just like, wow, I'm part of this now. Yeah, it was a little bit daunting to start, but I feel like you get into your own rhythm and you just play your darts, really. Like, you always have to just keep your focus and focus on the job you have.
Definitely, yeah. And that year, 2018, it was a big year for you. Soon after you made a final on the Challenge Tour, that gets you an invite to quite a few of the Players' Championships that year, where you picked up a few scalps. You made a quarter-final in one of the events as well. What memories stand out from that year playing on the Pro Tour?
Well, definitely the quarter-final. Obviously, a little bit gutted that didn't go further. I was, I think, 5-1 or 5-0 down in the quarter-final, and I've made a bit of a comeback. I was very upset that I didn't actually win the game in the end, but yeah, that's definitely up there. Obviously beating the likes of Johnny Clayton, Ian White, Nathan Aspinall, just to name a couple of
your first PDC title arrives later that year as well, winning on the development tour. How much did that win mean to you?
Well, obviously it was my first PDC win, and hopefully won't be my last. It means so much to me. Like, to be able to say I've won a professional darts tournament is something that not many people can say, and it does make you believe that you can really go further than where you're already at. But it's definitely something that sticks in my head as a major achievement of mine.
And you've come very close to winning a tour card as well. 2020 Q School last year, you were on the other side of that 87 finish on the ball from Aaron Beanie in the decider. How long did that take to get over having darts to win a tour card and just missing out?
I did have a few sleepless nights about it, I can't lie. It just hit me hard. Like, I thought I was there. I thought I was going to win it. I obviously had match darts as well, and I missed them and then lost the game. It did hurt, but in the same sense, he deserved it just as much as I did. He had to win all the games to get to that point, and he took his chance when it came, so I can't really complain about it. But I always wish him well and wish him luck in his tournament. Obviously, in a lot of ways, I'm gutted it isn't me, but I believe my opportunity will come.
Definitely, yeah. And although the last 18 months it's been fairly quiet for darts underneath the PDC due to the virus, we've seen a lot of you in the Moda stream playing at home, and then more recently the online league as well in person. How much has that helped you to continue progress your game with not a lot of opportunities out there?
Well, obviously, when everyone else is sort of struggling to find match practice, I'm playing weekly, very good competitive practice against some of the best people around the world, some of the most iconic names in darts. And you can't compare that level of match practice to anything. And especially under the circumstances, it was very well run and it was a very good event. And I'm so proud to be part of it.
When you look back to how it all started during those first lockdowns, playing at home, and now you've got the online league as it is now with a pretty decent prize fund, it's got to be said, for that Champions Week. Do you see this as something that's here to stay, maybe even when all the other tournaments get up and running again?
I believe it could stay, yeah. It's certainly benefiting a lot of players. It gives them a lot of match practice, and as well as that, there's prize money to be won. It's a win-win, and we're doing well commercially, financially. It seems like, and it's only going to grow and get bigger and better. So, I don't see why not.
And away from darts, I was looking at your Twitter profile. It says that you're a qualified chef. So if you had to invite 3 darts-related people around for dinner, who are you inviting?
Oh, that's a very good question. Terry Jenkins, because I love his attitude towards darts and the way he actually conducts himself. Obviously, I met him in the online live league the other week, and I thought he was an incredible man. And obviously, he's somebody who I used to watch when I was younger on the TV, and I've always thought was a brilliant dart player. And definitely Terry. The other two, I don't know. Maybe another chef so that they can compare their food to mine. And then Michael Van Gogh, obviously one of the best players to walk the planet, and obviously massive by far of the game, so I would say him as well.
Good stuff. Well, lastly, you've got the MAD Global title to defend. You've got the Challenge Tour, the Development Tour, they're starting up again soon, but what about at a local level? Will you be playing in any of the local leagues, the local opens with restrictions easing? Are you looking to play more now?
Yeah, definitely. As much as possible, really. Obviously everyone's had to halt it during lockdown, but now we're coming through to the other side of it. I do want to start playing, obviously, leagues, local leagues, Super League, county, when they all start back up, and probably get playing every day as such. Obviously getting out, not just throwing from home, playing in person with people. And definitely local competition. Whenever I'm not busy at work, I'll straight base and hopefully come home with a couple of titles.
Good to hear. Well, Jared, congratulations again on the big win last weekend, and wish you all the best with the rest of that and how it goes for the year, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks to Jared for joining. Now we'll finish, as we almost always do, with some listener questions. And we've got 3 of these this week that we'll take a little rapid fire. First one comes from Gordon Skinner, who very helpfully says, I've got a question. Do you think anything can be done about the crowds booing and jeering when the players are throwing for doubles? I would imagine from the ref's point of view, it would be like using a water pistol on a burning tanker, but something has to be done, no?
Honestly, I think we are beyond the point of return now, unfortunately, as far as PDC events go. And love them or hate them, the BDO, the Lakeside, which, as far as a BDO World Championship is no longer. But you think back to those tournaments, the referees were bang on with any fans that were out of order. They were stopping the play. And I mentioned it on the last show, if you want to boo, go in the car park. That did actually happen at the Lakeside during a Ted Hankey game. And we've seen another Lakeside more recently. The fans started a stand up if you love the darts. They stopped playing. The referee said, may I remind you, you're at the Lakeside. So they did have the best of order, but this is a different beast, the PDC. And I guess really it is a USP of the PDC product now. You've got that atmosphere, the loud noises, the crowds cheering and booing. It is a big event, a big crowds coming in, and it's the more people you have, the more difficult it is to get the fans to have the best of order. And we saw last week, I did have a little moan last week about the crowd at some points during the tournament. Christoph Ratajski, Luke Humphrey's game as one of the examples, and Going Price as well. The fans booing and whistling. I don't think there's much you can do about it, unfortunately, when you've got those big crowds. And Christoph said it himself. It's something that you have to learn to deal with. If you can't deal with it, then if you have got the crowd against you, you're not going to go very far, unfortunately.
Yeah, you said it exactly right. It's past the point of no return. It's something that probably should have been dealt with. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. Peter Manley used to get booed, but he kind of wanted that, and that was his own intentional doing to create the pantomime villain persona. But that was about it. You had a pantomime villain, that was it. Now it's just depends on where you are and who it is. They're going to get it no matter what. And no matter what the situation, and it's gone way too far, but what can you do about it? Unless you're actually going to start throwing people out, unless you're going to actually start throwing out the paying customer there's no way it's ever going to stop. And I don't think the PDC want to do that. I don't think the PDC should, because you're then having to draw lines about what is okay and what isn't, what's going too far and what isn't. And you're disrupting the match and disrupting the entire event to deal with the disruption to begin with. So yeah, something probably should be done, but it's gone far too far and far too long for there to be anything to be done. So I think it's here to stay, and I can't see how we would stop it.
I'm glad you mentioned Peter Manley as well. Those who listened to our Darts Legends episode with him recently said that he was getting booed in Tesco, the supermarket, and I don't think he was getting the store manager to throw people out for that. Here's our next question. It comes from our good friend, of course, Andrew Sinclair, who runs Inside the WDF. He says, seen a lot of people rattled about so-called gamesmanship in certain games from the last week. Do either of you boys actually see anything in it?
No. Which isn't to say there hasn't ever been times where the answer is yes. Because there has been. And gamesmanship is a part of the game, and just like the booing and jeering is. But gamesmanship is part of the game and will always be. It's a part of any sport. There is a line that shouldn't be crossed, because there is a line between gamesmanship and cheating. And there's a line between gamesmanship and disrupting the flow of the game alongside your gamesmanship. And, historically, Goran Price didn't know where the line was in the second one. But that's changed. Goran Price and the rules have helped clarify what is gamesmanship and what is disrupting the flow of play. And Goran Price has stayed on the good side of that line for the longest time. And there have been players, I'm not saying Goran Price because I don't think Goran Price has ever cheated, but there have been other players who probably have crossed the line into cheating. And that both of those things are wrong. But gamesmanship, I think, is fine. And what we saw this week, at best, there was some minor gamesmanship. That's not even really anything worth talking about. There's been even some more major gamesmanship in the past. And I think, Mensur Suljovic is a good example, someone who admits to having done gamesmanship or has admitted that sometimes he'll change his flow intentionally to put off his opponent. Gamesmanship is part of the game, and as long as you don't cross either of those lines into cheating or to actually disrupting the flow of the game, and by that I mean going after you hit, running around like you're Wayne Mardle at an exhibition who just hit a 180. As long as you don't cross either of those lines, I don't have a problem with it. And what we saw this week, I don't think is even noteworthy.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and I think there's a lot of people talking about that game between Going Price and Dimitri Vandenberg in the quarterfinals. And what about those dance moves from Going Price? We've not seen them on the stage before, and I might have to steal them when I eventually get back to a nightclub, maybe this Friday when I'm in Great Yarmouth, and pull those moves out because they were pretty special. But at the end of the day, they didn't do anything, did they? They didn't put off Dimitri Vandenberg. They didn't get him rolled up. He was able to stay cool, and what a mature performance it was. Okay, he let loose, as you would often say in the post-match interview on Sky, but while he was up there playing at the Oki, he was very cool, and as I said earlier, he did a really good job on Going Price. But yeah, I don't think he crossed the line. I think, of course, he was trying to get himself fired up, and that's what he needs. He needs that adrenaline, as we've said before. But yeah, we've seen Graham Fairhurst on this show, the PDC tournament director, at the start of the year, just after the World Championship. He was saying we were talking about gamesmanship, and he said it was something that the PDC and the PDPA are perhaps looking into. But yeah, I think from the last week, there wasn't really anything that I thought personally crossed the line anyway.
And our last question comes from Stephen Muir, 1982. And something we touched on a little bit earlier without going really into it. But can you see Peter Wright going into the 2022 World Championships as the world number one?
I think it's very possible, and this is going to be a fascinating subplot for the next 4 months. And you pointed out on our weekly Dartscast chat that we've got on Twitter with your secret Twitter account that no one else knows about, but you mentioned that the race to be number one, to be the top seed for Ali Pali is on, and provisionally Peter Wright is only £750 behind Going Price in that number one spot going into Ali Pali. Of course, there is a lot of events, a lot of prize money to play for over the next 4 months before we get to Ali Pali. But looking at some of the events, some of the prize money that is coming off Going Price's ranking before the World Championship, a lot of people talk about Peter Wright. He's got £500,000 coming off when we get to the World Championship. But before then, it's not coming off. So he's got a big opportunity, I think, to get to that world number one spot. And if he carries on playing like he did at the World Matchplay, I know it's going to be a tough ask to carry on that level of performance. But if he can go and pick up another big title and continue this form, I think he does have a big chance. And for him to get to world number one, I mentioned his age a few times, but to get there at 51 for the first time, tick that milestone off his list, we talk about the top 10 debate, it's just going to strengthen his case even more if he can get to world number one in this era of darts in the PDC, which is the strongest perhaps that it's ever been.
Yeah, and he's one of the players who's come really close to being world number one, but didn't get there. Obviously Going Price went the world title, but Peter Wright was just a couple legs away at the World Championship from provisionally becoming world number one, actually just a leg away against Gabriel Clemens. If he'd won that match with how the tournament went on, he would have provisionally been number one, only to be knocked out of that when it was all said and done. Another player who came within a few thousand pounds was Adrian Lewis. And now Adrian Lewis is down to number 31 in the world. So you see how, we can't say it's that quickly because we're talking a decade ago that Adrian Lewis was almost number one, or almost a decade ago, but how things can change. So this might be Peter Wright's one chance. Will he? I don't know. I mean, the race is really, really tight, and Van Gerwen's just too far behind. It's weird saying that, but he's almost 300,000 pounds out of it right now. So it really is a two-horse race between Wright and Price for the number one. And if Peter Wright plays like he did in Blackpool, yeah, the answer has to be yes, because no one is going to – I mean, yes, then someone might beat him on the day, but no one's going to beat him on the day enough times to deny him becoming world number one if he plays an entire week like that. But you can say pretty similar about Gerwin Price on many other weeks over the past year. That's why he's currently world number one. That's why he is currently the world championship. So I don't know if he will, but he has every single chance. The race is absolutely on. So to answer the question as written, yes, I can see Peter Wright going into the World Championships as the world number one, but I'm not going to make a pick on whether it's going to happen quite yet. Anything else for this week?
As always, got to say big thank you to our guests for joining us. Big thank you to you, the listener, for listening to the show. Big thanks to our Patreon members as well. You continue to support us on that. Thanks for doing that. And of course, our Dartscast trivia. We didn't have one during our mid-match play episode last week, so it was a couple of weeks ago now. But our last question was, before Chris Dobie and Ross Smith, who were the last two players to win their first PDC main tour titles on consecutive days? Of course, the answer was Daryl Gurney and Joe Cullen back in 2017. And congratulations to @Ben on Sport. He's done a double 2 episodes in a row that he's got the correct answer first. And here is this week's trivia question, courtesy of our producer Hannah.
This week's trivia question is, Peter Wright, at 51, became the oldest player to have won the PDC World Championship and World Matchplay. Who was the youngest player to win both titles, and how old were they? Good luck!
Thank you to Hannah for the question. We'll be back, next week right after the 6th Super Series, which now has 3 events as opposed to the 2. We mentioned last week only 2. I think I said it was off air, where I'm like, can you really call it a Super Series with just 2? Well, someone listened and put on the 3rd, so it's at least closer to being super. So we'll try to come back after that to recap that. Anyone you want on, let us know. Anything you'd like us to address, let us know. Just keep sending your questions in. Be a bunch of time for us to address it all. There's not much on the calendar for August, but there's a lot on the calendar once we get into September, October, November, and you just got to hang tight until that comes around.